A beautiful day where I am today. Got lots of things going on in our little community. It's rodeo weekend. Mother's Day is tomorrow, so happy Mother's Day to all of you who are, and grandmothers and caretakers, whatever. Happy Mother's Day. It has been an interesting week for me. I would like you to share in the comments and reactions that you are here and that we are all ready to go. So if pop in, I've got a few things to show you before we get started on today's topic of Tivaevae. Tivaevae, it's pronounced several different ways, and it's got several different spellings with V's, with F's, with A's, and with I's. So, but took the one spelling which came across as I saw the most. So Tivaevae, and it's from the Cook Islands. So let's first of all, I'd like to share with you a picture from a little while ago when we did the cathedral windows. We got a picture here of that, and I'd like to share that image with you simply because did a great job. Isn't that lovely? The colors are fantastic. I love the buttons in the center. Good morning, Suzanne, Venetia. I think this is hers, possibly, that sent this in, Rose and Joanne. So good morning, welcome. But I just thought she did a fabulous job on her cathedral windows. So that was nice to see. Then I have some other pictures that I want to show you this morning of some of the work of the women. This one was astounding to me. This is not sewn down yet. It is the under fabric, which is the green, and then the white that's on the top is completely cut out from one piece of fabric. And if you look at the circles, the tops or the petals of the leaves are connected to the rings that are in that quilt. And once they start to sew that down, in whatever way they're going to work it, they snip those as they get to them. So they create, these whole quilts completely with, cutting it out like we did. We used to do snowflakes, and as the Hawaiian quilting was last week. So that really was inspiring to me. And then let's take a look at, here is another example of Tivaevae quilting. And this is so colorful and so beautiful. This one, parts of it were done, cutting them out and opening them up. But a lot of this is all individual petals and flowers and leaves. So that is kind of cool when you look at that one. There were so many different possibilities, and this one too is so bright and springy, and lots of embroidery work done on this one. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. And then there is, here is how they more or less work. When they're basting it down, they have it completely laid flat, baste the whole thing, and then they usually work on it by sitting or around the quilt, or as she is. And I think I have one, nope, that was that beautiful. All right, so that kind of gives you an idea of where we're headed today. Very different than what I am going to do. Excuse me. And very, very different than what I'm going to do today with the Tivaevae. So I'm going to drop down to the to my table. And here is the beginning of a very small Tivaevae. What is really interesting that makes this one a little bit different than the Hawaiian quilting that we already watched and noticed was that everything is freehand. And they really look to nature for their quilts. You'll notice that there's lots and lots of flowers and leaves, that type of, pattern that they use, and they don't use patterns. There are no patterns, and that's why you're not getting one today, is because that they design and cut out their own. They either fold, the piece into fourths and draw the design, and then, leaving, the folded parts connected, and then when it opens after they've cut it, you get the design. But many of them also just simply create their own flowers and their own designs. So every Tivaevae quilt made by the women of the Cook Islands, is where this is prominent, is very different. It really shows their own personal artwork and their own personal style. So I got this started with a little bit of the tacking down, and what I'd like to do is to show you, and I'm going to use a friction pen. You can use chalk, a pencil, the sew line chalk pencil, whatever, this Quilter Select, one that fades over time, whatever you want to use on yours, or just simply freehand cut the flower. So I am just basically going to create petals, nothing overly difficult here. I want to kind of leave, I don't want too big of points as I come down. And get that. So I've got pretty much a 5-leaf flower. And I kind of want to get it. And since this is all going to disappear, I don't mind how messy it looks. So I've got a flower. And once I have the flower, I'm just going to freehand cut it out. And if you were cutting the many layers, you want a scissors that's going to cut the layers for you. And I should have grabbed my Karen Buckley ones, because the serrated edge of the Karen K. Buckley scissors are wonderful for this type of work, because you won't get the fraying that I'm probably going to get with. So I'm rounding off my underneath part. All right, so now I have my flower. And the next step would be to decide where on here I wanted to put it. And then I'm going to tack it down with a basting thread. And when I'm basting, or doing something like this where the thread really doesn't matter what I use, I go to small spools of thread that I have left over, or old thread that I wouldn't use on my, my good quilts, because it's just not, it's old. And cotton thread does have somewhat of a life. And I'm going about a 1/2 inch away, and I'm picking it up to do this, but the actual, when I watched a museum piece on Tivaevae quilting, they did this all laying on the ground. Almost always they have these large mats. I'm sure they're made out of the leaves of the whatever trees grow in the Cook Islands, and they put them down or on a table or whatever. But mostly I saw they were laying on the ground on these grass or leaf mats, and they would gather around and do this. And it was a time for the women of the the village to come together, to visit, to talk, to make these quilts. The other interesting thing about the Tivaevae quilts is that they do not have a batting or backing. It's very warm in the Cook Islands. They do not need, the warmth of the quilts at all. In fact, they really don't want it. So they're very, they're just the two pieces of cloth, the backing and the design that they put on. Let me get that out of the way. The quilt. And in just a minute, so I'm really kind of working my way around this. And this is basically the same way that you would, base the Hawaiian quilting that we did last week. And this basting for them is very important because it gives stability while they work and move their way around the quilt. And it also is a guideline for them as they turn it under. And so they knot it. And the knots pretty much stay on the top of the quilt. So they would have it basted, and now they're ready for the stitching. And what I found to be fascinating about the stitching of the Tivaevae quilt is that they do a lot of pretty heavy embroidery work on the quilt. And I think there was one of these that really showed that off. Let me see if this is the one. Nope, that was not it. Let me see if this one. Okay, that one is the one I wanted to share with you. As you can see, there's really quite a bit of embroidery work. And this is how they get the shape of the leaves. They get the shape of the petals on the flower. And in the inside there, you have French knots. You might have circles of buttonhole stitch, a lot of that type of thing. And I'm going to show you a stitch today that it's a knotted stitch. I'm not sure in our books in society that it probably goes by another name. I couldn't really find it. I was looking through Sue Spargo's book and I found several that looked very similar, but not exactly what I saw here, but it's like a blanket stitch, but it's a knotted blanket stitch. So anyway, there is for you to take a good look at the stitching on that. And I'm gonna start a little bit on the the leaf side. And I just got in the mail yesterday an interesting pen. It's called a fabric folding pen, and I didn't try it. I didn't see the package out front until very late, and so I did not try it. So I'm going to try it with you. I set it up, but it helps your fabric to fold if you need it to fold. And I was curious as to, so I filled it with water up to the water line, and then you get this little liquid. It's called fabric folding pen liquid, and you put a few drops in the pen with that so it makes this solution, and then you're ready to make some marks on your work. So I thought I would try it on this leaf, and it says to gently, take it, take it down, and we're going to see what happens if that makes it any easier. So you're kind of seeing it right along with me. Now, the other thing, there's two things that the women do. They will take, if they have variegated, and they like to use variegated threads, they will match up the variegation. So if this was here, and they a lot of them use double string, or embroidery floss or whatever, but they match it up so that the whole stitch, it'll variegate as it goes, but the one stitch will have the same color of thread in it. So I thought that was very interesting way of going about this. So let's see how this works. I want to take you up to the point again. Okay, now that was cool, because I will tell you that just, I could probably do this with my fingers. Oh, look at that. It really, I'm sounding very funny here. Okay, that is a very clever little tool because it is folding right under. I love it. Well, I would say that if you have some folding that needs to be done perfectly, I mean, look at how that easily that worked. And I'm not really having to press it really or hold it in place. I kind of love it. So there you go. We all learn together. So because they do not put a backing or a batting into this quilt, they want their backs to look fairly, decent. So they want no knots. So when they start they go under the first layer and come out, and they put the knot, they just make sure that the knot goes between the back side and the front of this, so that they don't have to worry about. And I think you can hold this any way that's comfortable for you, and whatever works best for you. And it takes me a minute sometimes to figure out what really is going to work best for me. So the first thing that you do is you're coming up through your cloth, and you're going to go over a little bit, and you're going to bring, and they kind of wrap it around their fingers underneath, but you're going to come up at the edge of your fabric, and at a slight, and this is where, I can't ever, tell which way is going to be the best for me. And then you're going to take your embroidery floss, and you're going to wrap it from underneath around the pin twice, or the needle twice, and then put it through, and pull that taut, and then you're gonna go under, and I've got that very far to the top, and I'm sorry. You're gonna go down through on the top of that, and then you're gonna come out right next to that stitch that you came up in. All right, so you've got that stitch right there. Then you're going to move a little bit further over, and I keep going up too high, sorry about that. I'm going to go over So my stitch goes down just a little ways from that, and I'm going to come up again, trying to, keep it even as I can. The needle is slightly at a slant because I want to go halfway between this knot and the next one that I'm going to make. So then again, I'm going to take my thread and go under that needle twice. They will go twice or 3 times around, and hold that. So it's basically a French knot. Then again, I'm going to go to the top of that. I am going to go down right next to where that first stitch was, and I have, 2 of those. Then I'm going to go up a little ways and bring it back slightly at a slant. Bring my thread under the needle twice. Hold it in place. Kind of make sure that the threads are pulled, so that they kind of lay next to each other. Go down and come out right next to that thread. All right, and then again, going over, coming up at a slant so that, I'm going to get that. And, I am thinking that I may draw a line around, that just simply so I put the knots in the same place and I keep my, my work looking neat, but certainly not necessary in that. So again, going down, coming out right next to that stitch that I brought up. I am going to go this. I want it right next to that, coming up at a slight slant so that I underneath around twice, 3 times if you have double knotted. It gives it a thicker look. And I'm just going to make sure that that's wrapped and straight in there. Going down, I'm going to do a couple of more here, and then I'm going to show you the point of the tip, because I think that's the, probably the most difficult part, and it's really not difficult at all. And it depends on how far apart you put them. It gives it a little bit more of a chevron look, or it gives you a little bit more of a straight knotted look. So I've come up at a slant under the needle twice to make my French knot. I'm pulling that, making sure that that's tight, going under, coming up right next to that stitch before, and let's get a couple more before I get to my point. So under, up at a slight. I feel like I'm doing this very awkward because I'm doing it backwards. So hopefully you can see a little bit better without my hands in the way. So just as a reminder to you, this around the world, I'm certainly not an expert in any of this. We just thought it would be a lot of fun to find out what people, do in other parts of the world. Some of it I've done, some of it I have not. And so this has been a fun journey for me and a great, learning time. And that's really what it does for me, and what I am already thinking in my brain is that there's some methods here and some things that I think I'll be braver about doing my own thing, creating my own, so that it's and I think I twisted that one a little bit, so that my quilting has my own style to it. You know, most of these that we've been doing in the last few weeks have been, quilting was brought to these places by, the missionaries. And then the women really took what they had learned from the missionaries and made it their own and used their style, their craft. And I think that is absolutely fabulous. I just think it's wonderful that, you know, and each of them from the different places. So there we've got that stitch that you see that I saw in a lot of the pictures. Now again, when they went under with this, they simply folded this straight down in underneath of that, okay? And to keep that point, then they moved it to this side and folded it under with the needle. And there was probably a little bit more fabric there than I needed to keep in that spot. So I'm just going to kind of play with it. And I think that pen helped considerably. So I think I'm sure that Kristen will put a link up for that pen, because right now, working this, that crease that pen made on the other side was absolutely wonderful. I think I found a new tool that I can't live without. All right, so now I've got my point, and as I come up, I can now come up into right next to this one. I will go under twice, hold that in place, kind of work it so that my point comes out nicely. I pulled that a little too tight too soon, so I lost my knot. And then as soon as I would get that folded under, I would start. Oh, I did that whole thing out of the camera. I am so sorry. So basically I took a stitch, I folded that down, I folded this around, and now I'm headed down the other side. And so I took another stitch in. I've got my point there. I'm gonna, go straight down on the top of that French knot, come out right next to that. All right, so I've got basically two knots side by side, and then work that with my needle, and I've got a nice point there on the end. All right, so that really is. Now this stitch that I just did, you can do single stitches in for, like the pistils of a flower with the French knot at the top. If you were to take this in a circle, it would create flowers on the center. On the leaves, they often did what I would call a fly stitch, but it was pretty much their own. It wasn't as patterned as I do, or I know to do a fly stitch. It was more random. And of course, they also crocheted. The Cook Islands, the women there do a lot of crochet work. And so with that crochet work, they would outline the quilts in that. They would use it through the center. It's very interesting because they do a combination of both embroidery and crochet, and whatever stitch that you would want to do around that would probably fit right in with what they do. I want to look at and see if there's any questions here. Um, okay. Um, yeah, passing on the crafts and thing from generation to generation, I think is absolutely wonderful. And Esty says that she's already, used that fabric fold pen with success. And somebody else, Jan says she loves the pen. Well, I think I just fell in love. And I do not know what Marimekko prints are, Michelle, but I'm going to look that one up. Needles that I recommend, really, when it comes to the needles, I recommend what feels best for you. For this type of work with the Hawaiian quilting and the Tivaevae, embroidery needles for me seemed to work the best. And if you look at the needle, that let me take the camera down to the table. I have an eye. I think what's most important is that the eye, and I don't know that you're going to be able to see it really, the eye of the needle so that the thread goes in easily through that and will move through your fabric. So I used an embroidery needle to do that, and that's what I would suggest for this particular work um, would be an embroidery needle. But as far as the applique, the reverse applique, the needle turn applique, I tend to use sharps because that's what feels good in my fingers. They're a little bit longer and they are very sharp. And so applique needles for those who work well with a smaller needle. So I think the needle has to fit the feel of your hand and what works best for you. Um, yeah, there are so many needles to choose from, and I would get for this type of work, I would just get a good a embroidery needle, and then I get sharps and milliners, and those are the three things that I use the most: sharps, milliners, and I get a variety pack so that I have different sizes depending on the thread that I'm using, because I want the thread to go through the eye of the needle easily and move easily through the fabric. um, so so that would, as far as questions, that was what I saw. Next week, we were going to go to Korea and do pajagi. The kits have not quite come in yet, and beautiful. I am. I think that is going to end up being one of my favorites that I've taught. That and the Kawantha. Um, stitching and stuff. But, when we get into that later on. So next week, I'm going to take a break until the pajagi fabric comes in. And so that for those of you who would like to try that you can order it before I have the class, where I'm going to show you how to make self-binding placemats, and then also either next week or the following week I will show you also mitered binding napkins, either double layer napkins or single layer. Either way, it works for both. And I'm gonna take a break from our trip around the world and show you how to make self-binding placemats, especially for the holidays that are coming up: Memorial Weekend, the 4th of July. Those are coming, and you might want to make some new placemats for that, or just have them for your home. So that's what we'll be doing next week, and I look forward to that. And have a absolutely wonderful Mother's Day and the rest of your weekend. Enjoy it. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And as always, thank you for showing up and joining us on this adventure that we're on here with the TQS crew. And we'll see you next week.